Welcome back, everyone, to Progressively Incorrect. My name is Dr. Zach Groeschel, and today I have the great pleasure of bringing you a very special episode featuring two of my podcasting rivals, Craig Barton and Ollie Lovell. This episode is brought to you by John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the absolute best books in education. In addition to publishing Craig's How I Wish I'd Taught Maths, and Ollie's Tools for Teachers, John Catt Educational has recently released an excellent instructional coaching book titled Maximizing the Impact of Coaching Cycles by Gene Tavernetti. In this book, Gene provides answers to questions asked by all coaches that are usually not addressed in other texts. Questions such as, how do I coach veteran teachers? And how do I start a reflection conversation after observing a poor lesson? I would highly recommend you check it out. Now, without further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Craig Barton and Ollie Lovell for this very special crossover episode of Progressively Incorrect. Enjoy!
Ollie Lovell. I'm laughing already. How are you?
I'm here, Craig. I'm here. How are you doing?
I'm a bit better than you. So again, just for a bit of context here, what time is it in your world, dear Ol?
It's 7 a.m. It's civilized.
Civilized, and you've got a cap on, which is this kind of new look you're going for today, and you're claiming you're just kind of 10 minutes out of bed, straight onto a pod. That's the way you roll, isn't it?
Yeah, I am in my pajamas on the bottom half.
We'll put this out on YouTube. This will be a good one, this. But anyway, enough about us. Oh, and I'm in a random hotel. I'm in a Premier Inn in Burton upon Trent as well. So we're flying it. But enough about us, because this is a very special episode. Because we're covering 3 continents. That's the way we're rolling these days. Because we've got a very special guest with us, right from the US, Mr. Zach Groeschel. Hello, Zach. How are you?
I'm great. Yeah. 7 a.m. is not that early, actually. I did a Think Forward Educators Australian gig at 2 a.m. and I had to drink 2 Red Bulls. So that was way more hardcore than what you're dealing with, I feel like. I'm a parent.
What you've got to realise, Zach, about Ollie is the thing is when he's had his first child here, he's made the error of saying he's got it all nailed. So the first couple of months, he's absolutely flying. And then I knew it was coming. Very slowly, he's been going off the rails, and this is probably the pinnacle of it here. So he's claiming he's losing sympathy left, right, and centre, claiming 7 a.m.'s early. But what can you do?
I actually said it was civilized, but anyway, I'm happy to take the beating. That's fine judgment. I like how you've obviously primed Zach behind the scenes, Craig, to have a good dig at me as well. This is really good. I should have definitely set up Zach for this interview rather than you doing it.
It's Zach, not Jack. You've got that as well. We've got the name sorted.
Yeah. Right? Mate, I am. So what actually happened was I decided at last minute it was a good idea to go to the Gold Coast to visit a school on Tuesday, despite the fact that my week was quite full. And then on the way back, my flight got delayed for like 4 hours. So I ended up getting in at about 2 a.m. and then had to give a keynote the following morning, plus a whole heap of deadlines yesterday. So yeah, I am a bit on the cook side of things. But I'm happy to be here, and I love our monthly chats, Craig. So let's go.
Let's go for it. Right. So, Zach, as our special guest, do you want to start by just saying a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I am an instructional coach, which is a full-time gig in many schools in the United States. So I'm in one building, hired by a district to work with teachers. And as a former teacher, that's typically how you get this job. I was promoted into this job, and I help teachers to improve their teaching. On the side, though, a lot of people know me for my own podcast, Progressively Incorrect, and some of my consulting and work around cognitive science. So yeah, super glad to be here.
Fantastic. And your teaching background, your specialist subject is maths, is it, Zach? Is that right?
No, actually, I'm an elementary teacher. I do love talking about math. I think it's because I hated math as a kid. I like talking about math a lot. But no, elementary teacher, 4th and 5th grade, mostly.
Amazing. Fantastic. Okay, and just final question on background. Just a bit of context about the school that you're coaching at. What age range are we talking there, Zach?
Yeah, we're talking about ages 11 to 14. It's the middle years. It's called a middle school. And the context is important because a lot of people know middle schools are typically pretty challenging in a lot of parts of the world, but this school is very has a reputation and a reality of being very challenging. So we're a turnaround school is what I would call us. Yeah.
Amazing. Fantastic. Right, well, let's dive straight in if that's okay. So if listeners aren't aware, Ollie and I get together every single month and we share, normally when it's just me and Ol, 3 ideas that we've been thinking about and experimenting with and just reflect on them. But when we have a special guest like you, Zach, we divide the workload up. So we've each got 2 ideas. We've no idea what they're going to be. I'm going to start with you, Zach. So what do you want to discuss first?
I would like to start by discussing standardizing entry and exit routines building wide. At my school, when I first got to this school, it was right after the pandemic. And I think we all sort of were taking things easy, thinking, let's just see how it goes with these kids. Let's kind of bring them in and maybe let's do some social emotional learning and kind of, get them excited to be back in the classroom. And we were in for quite a shock when students didn't seem to know how to attend school, how to get into class. And it didn't improve until we did something, and that was to first standardize the entry into each classroom. And a lot of teachers, I think, are against this idea of standardization, or they might call it micromanaging from leadership. But this is what it looked like. Essentially, every teacher needed to stand at their door and needed to narrate what they expected students to be doing. So for us, we walk on the right side of the hallway, and we call it a hallway, not a corridor. So walk on the right side, right? Oh, thank you for walking. Thank you for walking. Great job. And we're sitting here, we're building relationships. We're speaking and we're saying a script. I would call it a script. An internal mental script that each of us has, made our own. But time to get out of the bathroom, time to get to class. And then as students come in, we transfer our energy to the students by making this space seem and feel very serious, academic learning space. Welcome into the classroom. Let's get ready to learn. And the big push was making sure that every class had a do now or an entry task on the board, and that do now had to be easy access to everyone. I pushed retrieval practice to be the main focus of those do nows. So if you're in math class, you're doing the problems from yesterday, maybe intermixed with a couple of problems from previous weeks. If you're in history class, you're maybe just recalling what was in the last lesson or a few facts from the previous few lessons mixed in with other previous stuff. And then and here's the key part, we established rewards and consequences for students not complying with doing the do now, and I can talk about those in depth. But that created a very seamless and calm and strong start to the beginning of all of our lessons. And I feel it's extremely important. If you want to get teachers to teach, you got to do something like that if you work in a tough school.
That's amazing. I've got a few things on, but do you want to kick us off? Have you got anything for Zach straight away?
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Zach. I think it's super relevant, super interesting, and something that lots of teachers have often thought about in their own classroom, but often schools don't approach at the whole school level, and I think it can be so much more powerful when it is approached at the whole school level. I am interested in a few things. One is the standards. Like, a student's meant to be completely silent when they come in the classroom, or is it kind of quiet? Are there any times by which you expect them to be working when they come in? And I'm also really interested in those kind of rewards and consequences, because often that's really what it takes to get it going really effectively. So yeah, I'd love to hear about any of those things.
Yeah, well, it's unknown here in these parts anything related to silence in corridors. It's on Twitter. On Twitter, that's one of people's favorite things to bring up. That and slant, right? If we can just go back and forth between silent corridors and slant, Twitter, please never change Twitter. But here, that is not something that's even in people's consciousness. I think it would be something to try. I think it could be something that could be positive for our particular school, because in our hallways, students are bashing into each other, right? They're slamming into each other as they're going places. They're doing this thing where they just dunk on each other. So they see their friend way over there. They run up behind him and then they push their hands over the kid's head. The kid falls on the ground, backpack and pencils spill out everywhere. They run into bathrooms, and then, I'm standing on the side and boys, come on, get out of the bathroom, and find out, what's that flavor? It smells like cotton candy in there. They're vaping. They're huddled around a phone looking at pictures, inappropriate pictures. All of this could probably be fixed if we had better standards of walking in the classrooms. But to answer your question, when they get to the door and they hit that threshold, it needs to be, they need to be quite quiet. I guess we could call it we call it a voice level 1. It's not a voice level 0 at this time. But when they go and get their materials, huge problem, by the way, is at the beginning, teachers were putting their materials in all different types of places. We standardized it so that there was a mini table right at the door that has pencils, paper, notebooks, all of that. So they wouldn't cross all the way across the classroom, going through the rows of desks, bumping the rows, bumping into each other, getting their materials. The materials are right there. If you forget your pencil, you have a reminder right there. And then you get down, and once you start writing, it is 100% silent. 100% silent. There's no do now that involves a turn and talk. There's no do now that involves, acting something out or, manipulating objects. It's 100% silent with a pencil and with your notebook. Consequences and rewards. Are you ready? So what we did is we created an online platform that's very similar maybe to a house system, where teachers are putting points in for students based on specific behaviors. This behavior we call a kind of a category of behaviors is called ready to learn. Did you come in quietly? Did you sit down? Did you start writing? They give points. The points can be used for prizes. The points are used for surprise recesses and breaks. Points are used for like hot chocolate mornings or something like that, right? The consequences are the teacher actually has on every one of their doors, the doors are glass, has a card that on one side is green and the other side is red. If a single student in the entire classroom is talking or standing up or doing anything that is not complying with the ready to learn expectation, the teacher flips the card from green on the outside to us to red. And the person in the hallway that's in charge of that enters into the classroom and quietly brings that student outside. And we may call them, we may call home. We typically just call home right away and say, your child's not doing the ready to learn expectation. And you'd think parents would go, why are you calling me about them not having, them not doing a 15-minute or 10-minute do now? Like, why not call me for something more serious? That's not the reaction we almost ever get. We almost always get, I cannot believe my child cannot come into the class and sit down and start an exercise. I will talk to them tonight. And in doing that, 80-90% of kids do it without any reminders, and a very small percentage of students have more intensive reminders and more consequences, like, for example, detention.
Oh, this is amazing, this. I love this. Couple of questions from me. Well, kind of 3 questions on me. It's like 3-for-1 deal here for you, Zach. The first is, what was the kid's reaction to this? What was the teacher's reaction to this? And how long from when you first implemented this would you say it took for this to become the norm and the routine?
Right. I'll first say that this was an instructional coaching initiative. This is something that I really believe as an instructional coach, you do not have to do everything one-on-one, individual with teachers. You can create small groups of teachers and create something like a PLC, and you can do things building wide. I approached the principal, I approached the people that were interested in fixing up the behavior, and I said, this is something that's going to work to improve behavior here. And what it took was we got all the teachers to teach a lesson that was on the same PowerPoint. They taught a lesson about how this was going to go. We had a big assembly with each of the grades, first 6th grade, then 7th grade, then 8th grade. And we had a big assembly and we told them this is how it's going to go. Any questions, right? Is anyone confused about this, right? And we sent letters home. We did robocalls, we did newsletters. We told the students in 100 different ways. And then we started in 6th grade and we put all of us administrators, leaders, instructional coaches, counselors, all in one hallway. You can imagine like 9-10 adults all standing in the hallways, right? And there's only 10 classrooms, so each classroom had one person, and we were expecting maybe 100 kids are going to be called out of here, and we're going to call 100 people, right? It happened to be the first time was 40. And we dealt with 40, and then the next period it was 30, and the next period it was 10, and by the end of the week it was down to just, for the full day for that grade, it was just down to 2 or 3 per day. And then we moved up to 7th grade and then 8th grade.
Wow, that's powerful. And again, no resistance from the teachers. Was everyone pretty much on board with this? Because again, as you say, it's a controversial thing, right? Like if you go on Twitter and you look at this, it's a very deep divide. So was it challenging to get any of the teachers on board?
We are in a context in which the teachers will spring for anything that will work. Teachers don't survive very long here. Just with the year that I came in, the first year, everybody came and approached me, and they hadn't had an instructional coach in a few years. Nobody wanted to work here, even though the job was open. It pays 6 figures, by the way. No one wanted the job, right? Open office, nobody. A beautiful office with 2 windows. No one wanted this job. But on top of that, when I got there, 2/3 or so of the staff were leaving. Looking for any school nearby, any school in the same district, because they knew they didn't have to deal with this. So they're very open. The year before we rolled it out 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we did do 6th grade first. Kids in 6th grade are a little more docile. They're eager to please. They're eager to fit into their new school, first year of a school. And the teachers every one of them I knew was one of those kind of go-getter teachers. And we got them together and we said, let's do it as a pilot. And when we piloted it, it worked, and I advertised the heck out of it. And the other grades were like, "Well, when are we going to do it? Why don't we get to do the pilot?" So it very quickly spread in that way.
That's amazing. I've just got one more question, then I'll hand over to Ol just in case there's anything else. One thing I've noticed, and I'm going to discuss this with Ollie on a future podcast, is in many of the schools I'm visiting at the moment, latecomers are an absolute nightmare for teachers, right? So you've got your do now sorted, the kids are settled, and then if it's first period, a kid's rocking up 10, 15 minutes late, and it's always a disruption. Or the lesson straight after break, 2 or 3 kids are late, they've nipped to the toilet and so on. Or in lesson changeover, some kids got lost and then they arrive late, and it just disrupts the flow and that kind of golden silence that you may have established. How do you deal with latecomers in this system, Zach?
We didn't deal with them with the card that I spoke about, right? We didn't change it to red. They came in, we didn't double penalize them for being late, but we do have an attendance system, and the attendances trigger 5 tardies, 3 tardies, whatever it is, lateness to the class triggers a detention. We were able to hire a person who is there. We call them something like the restorative justice officer, something very, very, very much not what they do, but essentially they are in charge of the detentions and they deal with this. It is disruptive, and the teachers can't stand it. And really, it's about the presence of the leaders, the administrators. We call them administrators. I know you don't call them that. But the principal, the vice principals, the instructional coaches. We did even have a bit of pushback from people like in my role who, do I really need to be monitoring the hallways? Do I really need to have a presence there? Can I just meet with students one-on-one and counsel them? No, you can't. Not at this place. Not at this school anymore. Other schools maybe, but not here. So we are just everywhere. We're omnipresent, and we're getting kids into class, and it's a lot better. It's a lot better than it was before, and we have the detentions kind of to back it up.
That's amazing. Ollie, anything extra from you on this?
Thanks, Zach. That's super interesting. I mean, my main thing or my main takeaway there is how hard you had to go to make this work and how you really focused your energy on that year 6 level first. I've talked to lots of schools who implement kind of whole school behavior change initiatives and things like that, and that kind of layered approach isn't one that I've been made aware of before. Some schools might have done it, but maybe I didn't ask enough questions to kind of get to it. But I think when you are trying to really turn around a culture, thinking about how many students are we practically going to have to follow up with here, and the fact that you had like an estimate of 100 meant that you could actually prepare for that and start really, really strong and send the core message to students. Oh yeah, okay, the teachers are serious here. They weren't just talking about it. How many students on average now are you seeing or are you having to call home for over a day for this particular starter thing? I'm just wondering kind of what baseline you've managed to make it to.
Well, I hope they don't listen to this, but we're not calling so much anymore, right? I mean, we had to create a big spreadsheet and send out, you get 15 calls, you get 15 calls. We're spreading out, and people have jobs other than calling, kids home. So once we reduced it down, once you get it to, if you think of RTI in terms of the pyramid, and 80% of your kids are going to do, can benefit from the core intervention. The next, that tier 2 needs maybe a more intensive intervention and so on, right? We're trying to get most kids to comply with a very basic expectation, which is to start your lesson strong, right? So after we got whittled it down to what I would consider our tier 3 high flyer students, these are students that really do struggle in a lot of ways, right? They're chronically absent. They maybe have brothers or sisters, or they themselves are in gangs, involved with violence. They've brought weapons in their previous school, and they've been passed to us, and we've had situations where spreading disgusting sort of images, sexual images between each other, spreading drugs, marijuana, right? We have kids that are have very severe and traumatizing backgrounds. It's really, so those are the kids we're going to pull them out. We're going to talk to them. We know they're 4 grade levels behind. So we're going to sit next to them in the lesson and be like, hey, let's do this now. Or, hey, let's do some mini whiteboards out on these little cafe tables out here. We're going to try to teach them the material, right? So a lot of times now we're not calling anyone's parents. We're trying to figure out how can we get them back into the fold and learning within, their core classroom.
That's amazing.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. All right, Al. Over to you, mate. What's your first idea you've got for us?
My first takeaway, it was actually going to be my second one, but it relates quite well to what Zach was talking about, so I've bumped it up. So I mentioned that I've seen a lot of schools, many turnaround schools, some of the more influential school visits, the ones that have had an impact on me, the ones I've conducted in the UK. Last year I came over for 2 separate trips, and I must say, whenever you see an amazing school, and when I say, or a school that has really, really high standards, probably more to the point, where students are just hyper locked in, they're focused, pace of every lesson you go into is amazing, I often find myself thinking, yeah, but what does it actually take to get here? How is this sustained? I can see how you could have a bit of a inspired bump or inspired sprint at the start of a term or a year, but what does it take to keep it going? And so I've been really trying to get my head around this, and I a school that I have a lot of admiration for here in Australia or a set of schools, is Mastery Schools Australia. They're in a similar context to you, Zach. They actually, we don't have middle schools in Australia, but they have specifically essentially created a middle school because that's where the need is. So their school goes from year 4 to year 10, which is very, very similar, just a little bit longer. And they only take students who have basically been kicked out of mainstream. They currently have, I think they currently have 4 or 5 campuses, with another 2 or 3 opening up next year. And they've just been started by Michael Roberts and Tony Hatton Roberts, who's a couple who've worked in education for a long time, and they just basically had the passion to make it happen. And the reason why I went and visited them for a second time actually is because Naveen Rizvi, who's a teacher and educator from the UK, had come out, they'd brought Naveen out over for just a term to try to step into a similar role to yours, Zach, as instructional coach, and to try to really give them another additional boost of kind of standards and expectations and achievement from their teachers. Also because Mastery Schools is growing so fast, trying to staff the schools and train up their staff quickly and efficiently is a massive challenge. So I had heard that Naveen had done amazing things even in a single term on one of their campuses in particular as a coach. And I really wanted to know what it was that she was doing that was, having such an impact. So I went up, and what I saw was this is actually a terminology that comes from Michael. He summarized it as relentless precision. So basically within 2 hours of classroom visits, I saw Naveen go into 6 different teachers' classrooms, coach every one of these teachers, give every one of them feedback. And also this included the kind of live coaching that you were talking about in a previous episode, Craig. If she saw something where she saw there was an opportunity to kind of leverage learning a little bit more, raise the standards a bit more, she would just jump in and be like, "Oh, Miss blah, blah, do you mind if I take over for 2 minutes?" And she'd just jump in. And I saw her do this a few times. At one time that was particularly memorable was where students were doing some spelling practice. And it was clear that they were kind of doing choral response. They use direct instruction programs. It was clear that a few of the students weren't 100% on that terminology. And so Naveen came in and she did 3 or 4 minutes instruction with these students. And she got them to spell, respell, and respell again these words over and over again. She did like whole class. She did, "I'm going to check you, I'm going to check you." Until at the end of those minutes, those students must have spelled each of those words about 10 times each. And every single one of them was just smashing it. And Naveen was like, "Okay, thanks everyone, amazing job. I know you're sick of me now. I'm going to hand you back to Miss blah, blah, blah." And I just saw her hold this standard the whole time. And even the way that she spoke to teachers, I mean, it was just the intensity and the energy and the relentlessness and the precision of like the key fine action steps that she was trying to support them to enact. It was just really clear to me that that's what it takes. It takes people who hold themselves to a high standard, which then kind of spreads out throughout the organization. And in many ways, I mean, that makes so much sense. And I've seen it in my own classrooms, because some days I am really on and I'm like, all right, we're going to have a really high standard here. And when I come into the classroom and students can kind of sense that that's the zone I'm in, they'll come along for the ride generally. You might have a couple of students make a peep in the first couple of minutes, and you might give one a warning, and you might move a couple more, and they're like, all right, he means business today. And other days I'm kind of a bit out of it, as I am today, and I'm not holding the standard as highly. And students kind of detect that straight away, and things start to slip even within the course of a single lesson. So it's just this idea of regulation is a top-down process, and we need people in our schools who, ideally everybody, right? And the reason why I was keen to share this today is because I think that all of us, particularly myself, speaking for myself, can be more relentlessly precise in terms of the standards we're trying to hold. But I think this is one of those kind of dispositional characteristics that you need a person or people, and ideally multiple people in a school, to really set and hold a standard. And that takes a hell of a lot of effort. But it's really what it takes. Now, I'm sure there are other ways to do it, and I'm sure over time it becomes more of a cultural thing rather than an effort-supported thing solely. But that was just a really, really interesting insight for me to understand what it does take to hold high standards in schools.
That's great, that all. Zach, I'll give you the first go at this, and I've got a few thoughts as well.
Yeah, my first thought is really about that live coaching piece you said, right? That's my life sort of. I kind of liken it to singing in public a little bit, where of course some people don't mind. They'll sing live, and they don't even need a drink before they do it, right? They'll just start singing and they love it. And other people, they need to sort of build themselves up to they need to build up that confidence, and they need to sort of pump themselves up in advance. I think I'm sort of in the middle right now. I was wondering what you think about when you're elbow to elbow with the teacher, or you see something and you just want to dive in, or you want to take over the classroom, like how you get yourself to do it when there's so many social dynamics between you and your colleagues and so on.
It's a really interesting question. So I think you have to have a strong relationship with the person who you're jumping in for already, and it has to be pre-established as like, this is going to be the norm, and they have to really, really believe that you 100% have their best interests in heart, and at heart, and you need to do it in such a way that that's clear. Otherwise, there's a huge risk that they're going to feel that you're doing a like, let me show you how it's done kind of thing, which I mean, in many ways you are, but for them to take that positively, that culture needs to be there. Interestingly, at mastery schools, the way that they do that is they have assistant teachers there, basically people who are doing their teacher training, who are in every classroom as support. And for some of the time and for some of the programs like Spelling Mastery, the assistant teacher will actually deliver most of the lesson. But there's the potentially tricky part of the lesson is error correction. And this is where, this is basically, I just described it, Naveen jumping in for some error correction there. And so what will actually happen is these assistant teachers will be running the standard scripted program. But when students are really struggling, the standard teacher will jump in and run the error correction. So you've actually already set up this culture where people are jumping in to support each other and help learning. So teachers do it for the assistant teachers. Therefore, and that's something that Naveen set up as well. Therefore, when Naveen jumps in for the standard teacher, it's just a part of this same continuum. So that's the kind of the cultural piece. As for, I think it's an interesting one you mentioned there, Zach, the kind of the challenge for the coach to do the live coaching and in terms of revving themselves up and so on. One of the most powerful things I find in terms of whenever I need to stand up in front of people or do something that's a little bit challenging is I try to get myself in a mindset of, rather than kind of presenting or performing, more of a mindset of sharing. And I find when I'm in a mindset of sharing, I'm just much more comfortable to give things a go and to also lead with a sense of vulnerability, because like, I'm not saying I have all the answers here. I'm just sharing something that I think might work better. It might not work better, but no matter what happens afterwards, we're going to be able to have a good conversation about it. And we're going to talk about what worked, what didn't, and why that was the case. So I think for me, trying to rev myself up to do a demo like that, if I could kind of frame it as like, I'm going to actually, so you've just had a crack at something, I'm going to have a crack at something. We're going to be able to discuss it later. Hopefully this is helpful to you in some way, whether as an example or non-example. That can be a way that kind of takes the pressure off the coach, but also sets up that culture where you're not like necessarily sitting above them as much. So a couple of ideas there.
That's really good. That's great. Anything else, Zach, before I just jump in here?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so just a slightly different angle on this all. So I'm a massive fan of Naveen. She's I've booked her in for the podcast for Jan to reflect on some of the work that she's been doing, because it sounds absolutely fascinating. But I'll tell you what, your story's got me reflecting on there, and it's again something I've experienced recently. So I always come into schools as an external person. And sometimes, a lot of the time I'm doing it over kind of 4 or 5 days spread over the course of a term. But crucially, I'm not in that school day to day when I'm offering the support. And it always blows my mind, although perhaps it shouldn't, how much kind of gets lost in translation. So I'll do a CPD session at the end of day one with the maths department on something like checking for listening or checking for understanding. And then I'll come in a week later or 2 weeks later, and things have gone off the boil a little bit, like the standards have dropped. And just when you're describing what Naveen's talking about there, it just makes me realize how important it is to have somebody who's permanently in that school, who's going to always be there, who at a moment's notice can come into your lessons. They can come in 5 times a week if you want them to, and they're going to be there next week, and they're going to be there next week. Because when you're talking about like the precision that Naveen's on out there with the language she's using, the modeling she's using, and so on, you can't just have somebody come in even for a day and deliver that to staff and then, cross the fingers and hope magically you're going to get that same standard. So it's just really made me think about, and again, Zach, this will kind of tie into your role, right? You're in there day in, day out. And I think there's a real challenge for both people delivering external CPD, but also the people who organise that CPD to think, and we've talked about this before, Al, how you kind of sustain it. And I just think whenever we're talking about something as precise as what you're talking about there, the work that Naveen's doing, it's just so hard unless you've got somebody in there kind of day to day. I don't know if that makes sense, Al, at all.
I couldn't agree more. I think you need people leading this. I mean, this is why we've created at Step Lab the certificate in coaching leadership, because we've recognized that the person who's implementing coaching in a school needs to be like really, really good, really committed, and also supported for an extended period of time, which is why we do like fortnightly check-in and accountability check-ins, because it's really, really hard to keep up that momentum and that motivation. Some people can do it. Like Naveen seems to have like a bottomless pit of energy to hold these standards high, and that's amazing. They're the kind of people you can ideally hire, but it's hard to find people with that level of energy, right? So one, having a person whose job it is, either sole job or like there's it's the vast proportion of their job and they don't have to do all this curriculum writing that then attracts them to their office, so they're not wandering the classrooms and so on, because that's the core part of it, being seen. And two, having some mechanisms to keep them motivated, whether it be a weekly check-in where you say, how many classroom visits have you done this week, how many, whatever it might be. Those kind of things are absolutely crucial, I think, to keep the standards high.
Yeah, just one more thing on that before I just give Zach an opportunity if he wants. One thing when I do my coaching work that I've really tried and steer kind of teachers away, schools away from, is often within a day they'll ask me to work with 4 teachers, to coach 4 teachers. So I'll watch 4 lessons or 4 portions of lessons, and then we'll have 4 coaching sessions with those teachers. And invariably, they want me working with their ECTs, so they're kind of novice teachers in their first kind of 2 years of teaching, or teachers who are struggling a bit, results are down and so on and so forth. But the point I always make is chuck in some of your best teachers into the mix there, your most experienced teachers, because they're the ones who are going to be driving the thing forward when I, drive back home. So you want to get your good teachers to be exceptional teachers so they can bring everyone along. And I think that's going to be far more effective in the long term than getting your weaker teachers up to that standard of good, again, if that makes sense at all.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. You need to think about systems, basically. You need to think about how are we going to sustain this? Clearly, Zach has thought about that, going back to his standardizing entry and exit routines idea. It's like, okay, we're going to set this up. There's going to be some energy at the start, but like, what's actually going to keep this going long term? And if people aren't answering that question, it's really just a flash in the pan.
Absolutely. Zach, any final reflections on Ollie's point there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to keep talking about the energy of the coach, but I've said this before, because instructional coaching, may be one of the buzzwords that they're going around right now. But it's almost like we talk about the debates in instructional coaching being that kind of directive coaching and that facilitative coaching, and I feel like the true nature of this job, at least here where I am, is I don't even think very many instructional coaches are coaching, and I that's only my feeling from visiting them and doing our PLCs with them and getting in. And I think there's what you say about that energy being so important. And because with a classroom of kids, they keep you straight, right? They're right in front of you, and if you drop the ball, they're gonna, you open up a void, they're gonna fill it, right? You have to come to class prepared in a lot of ways. But you don't have to do that with this job, at least not mine. You really can make your own schedule. And so it is something about that will and that drive, that personal accountability that I think is really important. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Definitely. And I think schools can do a better job of driving that. Like I was alluding to before, if you have a weekly check-in with your line manager and there's expectations about how many classrooms you've been in and how many coaching sessions and so on, that can be a real motivator, but it's about recognizing the importance and the value of that. But I think and I'm 100% on side with you, Zach, a lot of people just aren't doing the coaching, whether that be aren't even getting into the classrooms, or when they have a coaching conversation. I would say it's not really coaching unless you end up on like a core action step or action for the teacher to go away and do, ideally with some rehearsal and things like that. So if your coaching's missing some of those active ingredients of what makes it effective, then you're not really coaching either.
Amazing. Brilliant. Okay, should I do my first one?
Go for it,
So, right, strap yourselves in for this. I've got a new idea that I've nicked off someone, right? So I'll just fire up my Evernote doc so I don't mess this up. So I've been listening to an audio book, and it's by a guy called Ross Atkins, and he works for the BBC. He's a journalist and kind of like a news anchor and so on. Anyway, he's just put this book out, and it's called The Art of Explanation. So the title kind of stood out to me straight away. And basically, he describes how, as kind of like a broadcaster, as a journalist, he's got to take in all this information and he's got to convey it in a way that's going to make sense to a pretty diverse audience. So I got this and I thought, you know what, there's got to be something in here for teachers trying to explain things. And he has this concept that really kind of hit home to me, and he calls it obstacles to understanding. And and when he's kind of putting together an explanation, he thinks, how many of these are things to try and avoid, these pitfalls to avoid? What are the things that could get in the way of my explanation making sense, in our case, to our students? So what I've tried to do, listening to what he says, and also thinking about kind of my own teaching and so on and so forth, I've put a list of 9 of these obstacles that I'm just going to go through here. But this is very much a work in process. So what I want you to do, Zach and Ollie, if that's okay, is, are there any of these that you would get rid of or perhaps merge together? And perhaps more interestingly, have I missed anything? Can you think of any additional obstacles to understanding that there might be? Okay, so I've got 9 of them. So straight in at number 1, an obstacle to understanding is kids not listening. If your kids are not listening, there's no chance of them understanding. If they are listening, it's no guarantee they're going to understand. But if kids are not listening, they're not going to understand. So first, we've got to make sure our kids are listening, paying attention. Another obstacle to understanding is a lack of prerequisite knowledge. And I often see this. Teachers dive into trying to build a new idea, but they're building it upon really shaky foundations. And if the prerequisite knowledge isn't secure, and we just dive straight into the new stuff, that's going to be a real obstacle for students to understand this new idea. Okay, so that's number 2. I'll go through all these again at the end. Number 3 is just a poor explanation, a waffly explanation, one that's going off on tangents and so on and so forth. Just a real poor explanation that perhaps makes sense to the teacher because they haven't scripted it, because they haven't thought it through and so on. The kids are like, what the hell's going on here? That's definitely an obstacle to understanding. Number 4, Ollie Lovell, this is right up your street, is extraneous load as perhaps part of that explanation. So it could be split attention effect, it could be redundancy effect, it could be a load of things that just suck up kids' attention and kind of divert that tension away from what they could be thinking about, which is the content of the explanation. So this could be poorly designed slides. It could be lots of kind of visual or auditory noise going on in the room. But extraneous load, I think, is going to be an obstacle to understanding. So that's 4. Number 5, and I think this is different to poor explanations, is not breaking things down. And this is classic cognitive load theory. And the reason I have kind of separated this from poor explanation is you could have a really brilliant explanation that's really coherent and it makes a load of sense to an expert, but to a novice, there's just too many ideas going on there. So by not breaking things down and trying to sort out one idea at a time before bringing them back together, I think that's a real obstacle to understanding. So I've separated that from poor explanations. So that's 5. We've got 4 more to go. Unreliable checks for understanding. So I think that's an obstacle to understanding because it stops the teacher getting a sense of whether things are on the right track or not. So this would be the classic, like, calling upon a confident, high-attaining student to answer a question to check whether that explanation's making sense or not. That's an unreliable check for understanding because their response is unlikely to be representative of the response of the rest of the class. Or it's a classic, does that make sense? And like, what kid in the world is going to put their hand up and say, no, it doesn't? So an unreliable check for understanding may actually be an obstacle to understanding because it stops the teacher from being aware that things are going off the boil a little bit. Okay, we've got 3 more to go. An ineffective response from the teacher could be an obstacle to understanding. So let's imagine the teacher's really good at doing checks for understanding. So they've got all the kids doing the mini whiteboards, but the kids hold up the mini whiteboards. It's clear that there's a load of confusion in the room, and the teacher just goes, all right, okay, yeah, I can see we've got that, and just cracks on. Or they kind of give a bit of a waffly kind of explanation to it and then move on. In other words, they don't address the evidence effectively that they can see in front of them. And that's going to stop kids understanding the idea as a whole. So that's number 7. Final 2, no opportunity to embed and consolidate. So the teacher gives the explanation, but then cracks on to the new idea. And kids don't have an opportunity to kind of digest it, work through it at their own pace, have a chance to discuss with a neighbour, just get some silent, independent work going on. So just kind of moving on too fast from one idea to the other, even if their explanation's really strong, no opportunity to embed and consolidate is going to be an obstacle to understanding. And the final one, you'll be pleased to know, and this is going to feed into my second idea as a bit of a kind of a teaser to this, no opportunity to retrieve. So this is the classic performance versus learning. Kids seem to understand it in the moment, but if we then don't revisit that idea at intervals going forward, at the start of next lesson, in next week's low stakes quiz or whatever, then that's going to be a real obstacle to understanding because kids are going to forget it. So to recap, here are my 9, and then I'll hand it over to you, Zach, just in case you've anything, and then Ollie, you can tear this idea apart if you want. So firstly, obstacle to understanding number 1, kids not listening. Secondly, a lack of prerequisite knowledge. Third, a poor explanation from the teacher. 4th, extraneous load. 5, not breaking things down in the explanation. 6, an unreliable check for understanding. 7, an ineffective response to that check for understanding. 8, no opportunity to embed and consolidate the idea. And 9, no opportunity to retrieve the idea. I'll shut up now. Zach, over to you.
Oh, I'm so glad you said I'll shut up now. Not because you did, but because that's my favorite line from your podcast. I'm so happy you just said it. Great. I love the list. I actually do a presentation on explanations, which is funny. And it kind of follows some of those points. You mentioned the poor explanation. There's nothing less useful to the teacher than going up to them and saying, your explanation was poor, right? So how do we operationalize that? That's the question. How do we say that wasn't, especially if we talk about clear, that wasn't clear. We can say a great explanation is crystal clear, it's concise, it's succinct, it's bulletproof, right? But what does it mean when a presentation is unclear? And I typically go into the realm of the teacher clarity research, which is related to Rose and Shines. It's in the same process product research. And what they would do is they would give, once they started experimenting with this stuff, they would give one group an unclear scripted explanation, and they would give a next one a clear explanation. And the unclear explanations were full of what they called vagueness terms, or they were full of mazes. I love that term mazes, because the mazes were basically like the explanation's turning and then it goes this direction and but I forgot to tell you about this part and then that thing. The kids are going back and forth, being jarred and kind of played around with as they're trying to follow the train of thought of the speaker. And the last one I always try to mention with that poor one is this idea of interjecting unnecessary or irrelevant information. This is sort of like your seductive details or your sort of discontinuous thoughts. I I sorry that I'm rambling, but I love to tell the story of how when I was trying to entertain my students one time, and I had drawn a Venn diagram on the board, and they just seemed kind of bored. I was explaining how to compare, how to contrast, and I interjected something for the purpose of entertaining them, and that was I said, "Doesn't the Venn diagram look a lot like a butt, like a bum, right?" And of course, now that I'm writing on this thing, all especially the boys, it seemed like, were jumping up and down and shaking their bottoms in elementary school, right? And every time I wrote, they couldn't get this out of their mind. So I think really only saying the words that you want to say and sticking to the point is what I think when it comes to a clear presentation.
I love that. I love that. Just a couple of things on that. Firstly, I like the fact you've gone for butt and bum there. You're appealing to all the globe with those two. So I love that. And just on this, you're right. And it's just this is why I wanted to run this idea by you, because as I say, it's a bit kind of hazy at the moment. I'll tell you what I think is quite a good measure of how clear an explanation is, and I think any teacher can experiment with this. And that is, if you do it's basically how easy it is to do a check for listening. So I'll give you an example of this, right? So if your explanation is all over the show, and as you say, going down kind of blind alleys and so on, if you try and check whether the kids have been listening, and they start firstly kind of struggling to articulate what you've just said, or you kind of hear your explanation kind of played back to you and you think, my God, what the hell was that? Then you start to realize that it's pretty poor explanation. Because the unfortunate thing is when teachers give explanations, if you don't check for listening, everything's making sense in your head because you're the only one hearing it and so on and so forth. But it's only when you get the kids to repeat things back to you that you think, oh my God, that was absolutely terrible. So I think if it's relatively straightforward for you to do a check for listening and what's coming back makes sense, it's probably not a bad proxy for the quality of that explanation. So something like if I'm trying to explain what a quadratic equation is, I may say something like, this is a quadratic equation. What type of equation is it? Ollie. And then Ollie's going to say to me, a quadratic equation. Whereas if I say, all right, so this thing on the board, so this is a type of equation and there's x's and so on. Like, I can't check for listening there because it's what information do I want back? So I think if you get into your checks for listening, that can be quite a good signal of how kind of clear your explanation is, if that makes sense, Zach.
Excellent.
Anything on this meandering list I've got?
Yeah, a few things. My first question, Craig, is what was the original list from Ross Atkins?
Yeah, I thought you'd ask that. So I'm being poorly prepared. I haven't got it written down, but I'll be honest with you, and it was a little bit on the vague side. So it was kind of falling into this idea of clarity, length, tangents and so on and so forth. And again, they were useful because, as I say, it stimulated this idea, but it certainly wasn't talking about responsiveness and so on and so forth, because he's thinking more of kind of broadcasting as opposed to, kind of responding and interacting, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because I was wondering, like, he's a broadcaster. How do broadcasters check for understanding? Yeah, interesting. It seems to me you've created like basically a template of multiple steps for just effective teaching rather than effective explanation. What would you say to that?
Very aggressive, that.
Was it? Sorry. It wasn't meant to be.
I like it. No, it's good. It's kept me on edge. I like that. I'm not so sure. Well, it's interesting you say that, right? Because I've got this kind of series of 10 workshops that I do. And like one of them is on checking for understanding. One of them is on responsive teaching. One of them is on memory, which are all essentially kind of steps, well, kind of one of 9 of these things that I'm talking about here. But I still think it's kind of specific enough to thinking about explanations. And we've talked in the past, all right, about checklists. And I want this to almost be kind of a bit of a checklist, that when you're given an explanation, just to kind of have a little flick down this list of 9 things, and not to do it in any depth or anything, but just think, do I know my kids are listening? Have I got a reliable check for understanding here? How am I going to respond to this? Just as a bit of a kind of simple checklist. And then if any of them are kind of deficient, you can then take a kind of deeper dive into them. So I think it works focusing specifically on explanations, but maybe it's a bit broad. I don't know.
No, I think it's good. I think it's. I mean, I 100% agree with all of them. I think, but maybe the only thing, what your initial prompt was like, what have you missed out, or what could be like amalgamated? Maybe the only thing that I thought could be amalgamated was the idea of like poor explanations. And when you talked about extraneous load, you gave examples like redundancy and split attention, which I would see as part of giving good explanations or not giving poor explanations. So I saw them as being similarly with not breaking things down. So in terms of having like the level of granularity of each of these 9 steps, like you've got one for reliable checks for understanding. So having one for clear explanations, which includes like breaking things down, extraneous load, I think would be more of a matched granularity level. That being said, if the focus of this is on explanation, then maybe having a high level of granularity around the explanation, the kind of 3 steps related to explanation is might be more helpful. The other thing I was wondering is like, how does this fit in? So something I've noticed that as we move on with these chats, Craig, is you love a model, right? You love
a model too. That you love them too, though, right? That's
I'm all
why
about the models.
Preaching to the choir here, right?
We're all about models. And I'm wondering how this one fits in with this fantastic book that I have on my shelf.
Oh, where's he gone here, listeners? Here he comes.
Tips for Teachers.
Oh, nice. Yeah, correct.
So I'm wondering, so if I go, let's have a look at the contents here. Because like, what do we want to support teachers to do? We want to support them to build coherent mental models around what quality instruction is and related fields. And each time we provide them with more information, we want to, if we hark back to the work of Sarah Cottingham translating Alzebel, we want to kind of like signal where in that schema we want them to attach this new framework. So I'll just read out the contents of your book. People should really read this book. I just finished it the other day. It's absolutely fantastic. Craig's not paying me anything to say this. But here are the kind of the 12 steps in the map on the start. Well, there's how to use this book, habits and routines, the means of participation, checking for understanding, responsive teaching, planning, prior knowledge, explanations and modelling and worked examples, student practice, memory and retrieval, homework marking and feedback, and improving as a teacher. So I guess my question, Craig, is do you see this? I mean, all of what you've said is already covered in your fantastic book, Tips for Teachers. So what do you see this adding to Tips for Teachers?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I can give a definite answer for once to this, because each of my Tips for Teachers chapters is a kind of presentation, a CPD session that I do. And so this list, I'm thinking, which one does it fit into? Which of my CPD sessions? So it's definitely the explanations one, but I think it's kind of towards the end of the explanations one. So as I say, kind of a bit of a checklist. I'm really seeing this as a bit of a, almost kind of, you can imagine it being like on a teacher's desk before they start to give an explanation, or when they're thinking about planning for an explanation. So yeah, I think it's going to fit into the kind of explanations thing. But I would also say that I'm kind of restructuring everything at the moment. So maybe it'll kind of shift around a little bit, but it'll certainly be kind of part of the explanation as a more kind of reflection style list, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. I see it as kind of a way of structuring the content in Tips for Teachers already. Because when I look at the order of this, habits and routines, yep, super important. I'd imagine that's why you brought it first. Means of participation, similarly, that's around the habits thing. Checking for understanding, maybe you put that early on because that is also like really crucial. Whereas this, I find people find it much easier to store information in their long-term memory if you present it to them in the sequence that they're going to use it in real life, / in the sequence that's like the narrative of the lesson, or the narrative arc of the lesson. And what you've got here, what you've presented today, these 9 steps, that's the kind of the narrative arc of the lesson. We've got kids not listening, that's basically what Zach was doing at the start, getting students to come in a way where they're focused and tuned in. Lack of prerequisite knowledge, thinking about what are they bringing to. So it's actually, I think it's easier to remember this sequence you've presented today than the sequence in your book already, which is fine. I think that's a great structure as well. But I think that's another benefit to this additional refining work that you've done as a kind of organizing cognitive structure for some of the work you've done already.
Love that all. I just need a catchy name and some kind of catchy acronym, right? So I can trademark this and get everybody chatting about it. No, that's good. That's good. Thanks all for that. No, always valuable feedback. I know I genuinely appreciate that, mate. Zach, any final thoughts? And if not, you can kind of segue straight to your next idea.
Yeah, I'll go to my next idea. I'm excited about this. I almost want to do this first. But we started with behavior because that's sort of a precondition for learning. And I wanted to talk about this gradual release or guidance fading that we often talk about in cognitive load theory. Here's my tip as a sentence. Improve your gradual release by incorporating 6 direct instruction shifts into your teaching. Right? And when I say, I'll give a little bit of background. Cognitive load theory supports this idea of guidance fading, the guidance fading effect. And what it does is it describes, perhaps starting with a worked example, slowly eliminating the steps of the worked example to present a series of completion problems. So maybe like the last step of the math problem is omitted and the student then has to solve it themselves, right? Not only does it make them pay attention maybe more to the rest of the steps, but now we're talking about retrieval, right? Or we're talking about sort of more active cognition. And then at the end, you finally have faded this away and the student is independently problem solving. It sort of is the bridge. It's the beautiful thing between being a novice and being an expert, or sort of those middle stages. Up until very recently, that's pretty much the only guidance I had around that. Scaffolding, guidance fading, I sort of described that to teachers. And then one day I stumbled upon, I found out that our school had a lot of resources, and in there was this direct instruction program, DI, capital DI, an Engelman direct instruction program called Corrective Math. And as an instructional coach, I make my own schedule. I really wanted to use this darn program because I had never taught with a real direct instruction program. I've talked to teachers about this project called Project Follow Through, which showed that direct instruction programs outperformed all of the inquiry-based learning programs in the 1960s and 70s. I was really excited to use it. And as I've been using it with this small group of 5, I have noticed that the gradual release is beautiful, and it is gradual, and it is slow reducing of scaffolds. And I needed to look deeper into the research, or deeper into the theory of instruction, to figure out what this program was doing. And so here I am. We're going to do 6 gradual release shifts that come from direct instruction. Are you both ready?
I'll tell you, I'm loving this. Zach, you're a good guest. I'll tell you now, you've thought this through. I love it. I'm excited. I'm ready to go.
And I know people who are listening to this don't have access to these direct instruction programs, but these are now, what I'm presenting to you are principles, right? You can take these principles, you can apply them to any sort of explicit teaching system. So let's start with shift number 1. Shift number 1 is the obvious one that is pretty much the same as the guidance fading effect. It says, go from an emphasis on the teacher role as a source of information to an emphasis on the learner's role as a source of information. So when you're starting a lesson, you're starting with teacher direction, right? You're starting up at the front, confident, leading the learning, and you are the one who is imparting the knowledge, while as you slowly go on through the sequence of lessons, more and more the students are the ones who are completing the problems, responding to the problems, self-explanation, explaining the material in their own words, applying the knowledge. That's the easy one. The rest of these I feel like could be new to teachers. Shift number 2, go from out loud to in their head, right? And the other way to say that would be go to overt problem solving to covert problem solving. So basically, when you're first starting with a direct instruction program, you're trying to get as much unison choral response as possible. You're trying to get them to say the material out loud so that you can check for understanding. But as you go through your lessons, you can slowly start fading out how much they are saying the material out loud because they're going to be writing it, right? They're going to be doing it, and it's okay now that it's in their head. The teacher is secure in the belief that they know it through all their formative assessment. So shift from lots of out loud at first to it's mostly in their head towards the end, right? The next shift number 3, go from massed practice to distributed practice. A lot of times when we talk about space practice in the cognitive science world, we make massed practice sound like it's the worst thing in the world, right? We should really space out that practice. We need to interrupt the forgetting curve. But when you're just first learning something, you need to practice it many times in a row right away. You don't want to start spacing it out because I feel like at that point the difficulty is no longer desirable, right? It's too hard to remember what you did 2 or 3 days later. You need to do a lot of repetition in a row. Go from mass practice to distributed practice. Shift number 4, similar. Go from immediate feedback to delayed feedback. You're gonna, again, a lot of people think maybe immediate feedback is always the best, and you're gonna wanna give students a lot of corrections. You're gonna wanna correct every little error so they don't embed a misconception. But as you work with them, imagine you want them to write an essay. At the beginning, you're giving them corrections on their punctuation, and you're giving them corrections on their transition words, corrections on every little thing you teach. But then you're eventually going to have them apply that knowledge, and that feedback is not going to be immediate because they can't write it. You need to, once they're applying it in a more complex context, your feedback is going to be delayed just a bit, but that's okay because we're in the application stage. We're at the end of the gradual release. Shift number 5, go from heavily prompted to unprompted. And for this, I thought I would kind of read a reading example. So imagine you're at the beginning. I said go from heavily prompted to unprompted. So imagine you're teaching reading, beginning reading, and you're trying to teach them about the bossy E, right? That when you have an E at the end of a word like rate, that the E makes the A not say ah or ah. It makes the A say its own name, rate, right? And so at the beginning, you're going to have a lot of prompts to direct attention towards all of that information, and you're going to slowly fade it out. So it would look like this. This is from Reading Mastery, I believe. Remember, when there is an E at the end, this letter says its name. Is there an E at the end? Students say yes. Will this letter, point to it again, say its name? All the students say yes. What is its name? All the students say A. So what is this word? Students say rate. Well, now you're going to fade those prompts to the next time, and eventually you're going to get to a very unprompted version of that where you're going to just show up a word like rate, and you're going to say, what is this word? All the kids say rate, right? And towards at the very end of this, you're just having the students finding those words in a story or in a book, and they're reading them in real books, right? Completely unprompted. The last one, and I feel like my empathy was with you, Craig, because when you go down a list like this, you get towards the end, you're like, am I sustaining attention? Do they still care about this, right? I get to this last one, shift 6. Go from simplified context to complex contexts. And that's like what I just said with finding the word in a real storybook, writing that real essay, doing the real application exercise. At the beginning, we kind of want to have manufactured sort of you want to create context or problems that don't really feel very real at all because you've broken them down so that they're simply drills or exercises. You've broken the material down just because you want them to repeat and revoice and practice those bits. But when you get to the end, you want that product typically to be something worth sharing or worth doing. So writing that essay, doing that presentation happens towards the end that's the more realistic or more complex context. Yep, that's my list.
Zach, I love it. As I say, me and Al love a structure, we love a system, we love a list, and you've done it all there. That's amazing. I'm going to hand over to Al for this, but I'm just going to ask a little favour. Can we not talk about number 3, the master distributed? Because spoiler alert, I'm going big on that in my final takeaway, and it'll all be kicking off. So, Al, over to you.
Love that. And it's often funny how we end up talking about similar things, Craig. There's often, I don't know, there must be some sort of a connection between us and the guests that we have on that means that we're somehow stimulating each other's thought across the world in between these discussions. It's great. Zach, I think this is a fantastic framework, mate. Like, these are all ideas that I've come across and that I've encountered in different areas and domains. But I haven't seen one put them together. And I think the way you've put them together with kind of a repeated structure, go from A to B, makes it really clear for viewers or listeners how they're all related and how they all relate to this idea of gradual release. So I think you're onto something here, mate. And I would encourage you to turn it into a book, actually, if you're not already. Are you already?
No.
Okay, you definitely should.
Okay. It's in it. Yes, it is in a chapter of a book I'm writing. But yeah, continue.
Great. Yeah, and I think it's really good. I think my favorite one, or the one that I think actually there's probably two favorites, and these are because I think actually maybe there's 3 favorites. Maybe there's 4. No, let me talk about a couple. It's really good, Zach. I'm excited about this. Something that teachers often don't do particularly well is the we do. You know, when I spoke to Anita Archer, I said, Anita, what's the biggest mistake teachers make in their instruction? And she said they skip the we do. I also note that you quoted Anita earlier when you said avoid. You didn't use a full quote, but you said avoid the void, and she likes to say avoid the void or they will fill it. Anyway, back to this. So teachers skip the we do, but that's because they often don't know how to do it, right? What is a we do? What does a we do even look like? And to my mind, and kind of dissecting some of Anita's work and also looking at some of the DI programs that you have, the we do is that step 5, go from heavily prompted to unprompted. So basically what you're doing, well, the step before the heavily prompted is the I do. It's basically the teacher saying, look, this is a bossy E. A bossy E makes the preceding vowel say its own name. Let me give you an example, and then goes through it, right? So that's the I do. The we do is exactly what you're talking about. You're basically stepping students through the cognitive process required to solve the problem. And you gave us this great example. Is there an E at the end of the word? Yes. Is there a preceding vowel? Yes. What does the E do? It makes the vowel say its name. Okay. Is the vowel going to say whatever it might be? I don't remember it exactly. And so teachers often, I don't think it hasn't been codified well enough what the we do actually is. And I think saying going from heavily prompted to unprompted is a really, really nice way to codify that we do. I think also bringing in the idea of immediate to delayed. This is probably my second favorite. Number 3. No, I'm joking, Craig. I'm not gonna touch that one. Number 4. Go from immediate to delayed feedback. I think is a really, really nice one as well, because there's a lot of debates about kind of immediate and delayed feedback. Which one's better and so on. But it's, as with most things in education, it's a question of, where does it sit in the instructional routine and what are you trying to achieve from it? And so by you putting it in this framework of we're actually doing gradual release of responsibility, start with immediate feedback to make sure that students aren't kind of practicing things that are completely on a tangent or incorrect. But then as they get more independent, you can start to move to longer cycles of feedback is great. So in short, great summary. I've got some particular favorites in there, and yeah, I'm looking forward to that book chapter.
Yeah, It's bloody good, I'm annoyed. Well, I'm glad I don't have to do my list after your list, because your list's a lot better than mine. So I'm pleased I got mine out of the way there. It's really good, that. So I've got a different favourite to all, actually. I mean, I like them all. I think it's a brilliant framework, this, mate. I think it's brilliant. I love number 2, that out loud in their head. I think that's absolutely brilliant, because well, my kind of understanding of it anyway is when we're first teaching something, we have to get that data from the kids as to whether it's making sense. So the most out loud that you can do is kind of a choral response to check that all kids are listening. And then you might then transition to cold calling to check for understanding, or even mini whiteboards are kind of out loud in a different kind of way. You're getting data from all the kids. But then when you transition to independent practice, that's all going on in their heads, and you only kind of see the fruits of that labour a little bit later on. So I really liked that. And also, just to pick up on what Ollie said, Ollie, I don't know if you remember, it might have been the second one of these episodes we did, or the third, where I started kind of presenting my kind of 4 steps of a worked example. And just for the benefit of listeners here, the first was kind of the I do, which I'd often do silent teacher first and checks for listening. But then the next 3 would essentially be the we do, but kind of 3 different stages of it. And again, using your framework here, Zach, I think I really like this idea from moving from heavily prompted to unprompted. So my first, I do like an I do, like let's say we're teaching the kids to add fractions or something like that. So I'd model the adding fractions in silence, then I'd check for listening. And then I'd say, okay, now we're going to do what I call step by step. So I'd put a problem on the board and I'd say, okay, on your mini whiteboards, the only thing I want to see on your mini whiteboards is what common denominator are you going to use to add these fractions. The only thing I want you to write down. Write it down, 3, 2, 1, show me. Okay, now the only thing I want you to add to that now is what's the numerator going to be of this first fraction. It's all I want to see. So I'm getting that data kind of, I'm really heavily prompting them for exactly what I want to see. But then in the next phase of it, I call it a start to finish. So I say, okay, now I'm going to give you another pair of fractions to add, but you're going to do it all from start to finish. And then you're going to show me on your mini whiteboard. And then we're going to use Adam Box's tick trick to look through our working and see if we've got all the different steps in place. So it's less prompted. And then finally, I'm going to move to what I call variations, where I say, okay, what if I change the denominator from a 3 to a 4? How's that going to impact our answer? Make the change on your mini whiteboard. So far less prompted as well. But again, that's always kind of what I've done, but I've never had that framework as shifting from heavily prompted to unprompted. So yeah, I really, really like it. It's good, that, Zach. Very good.
Thanks.
Yeah, very, very good. He's too good for us all. We won't have him back on again here. He's putting us to shame here. Jeez.
I agree. He's making us look bad.
Anything else from you all on Zach's thing, or do you want to dive into your final one?
Yeah, we'll move on. I am definitely keen to dive into Zach's more in the chapter, but yeah, I absolutely love it, Zach. Really powerful framework. The second takeaway for me, I was just thinking about if I wanted to do a different one instead, prompted by what Zach was. Should I go? Should I just go and do a rando one that I haven't prepared for, but
you're going
an
rogue
insight
here,
that I
Ol.
just had, or should I share the one that I was planning? What do you reckon?
Sleep deprivation's kicking in. Oh, God knows what you're going to do. What's going to come out your mouth here? Who knows? Go gamble. Do the gamble.
All right, I'll do the gamble. Okay, so one thing I've been a bit unsure about over time is this idea of self-explanation. So self-explanation is basically when you prompt students to try to connect what you've just taught or a new idea that you're presenting, try to connect it to some sort of prior knowledge. And the reason why I've struggled with this is because to me it seems like, well, why wouldn't you just be explicit to students? In education, Dylan William likes to talk about the opportunity cost. The opportunity of a self-explanation is potentially the teacher just explaining that connection to students, right? And so I've been, even though there's a chapter in cognitive load theory in action on it, and I know you mentioned it in Tips for Teachers as well, Craig, I've always been like, okay, I get self-explanation, I get the mechanism, I get the prompts and how, but I'm struggling to identify when it's more effective than teacher explanation. And I was writing my summary of my interview with Sarah Cottingham recently when she talked about Algie Bell's meaningful learning, and I really enjoyed that discussion, and it was a really deep one about what is learning and what does it take to make learning happen, and self-explanation was one of the things she talked about. And she talked about self-explanation as basically giving students an opportunity for meaningful learning. Meaningful learning meaning giving students, I actually think meaningful learning is a bit of a misnomer. It's just kind of like, I think accurate learning would be better, because all learning is the same. All learning is connecting new knowledge to old knowledge to make it stick. Sometimes that learning is accurate, and by accurate I mean the connection made is actually representative of real life, and sometimes it's inaccurate. It's an erroneous connection that's made. So I think all learning is meaningful, but some learning is accurate and some learning is inaccurate. Anyway, so she talked about self-explanation as giving students an opportunity to accurately connect new knowledge to something in more of the student's personal experience. Like, because the teacher can never know all the prior knowledge that students have. And so every connection that students make may be a unique one. There might be something that happened in their life or something they've seen, something they've experienced that they can make a connection to. That's going to be a really robust and useful and secure connection that they have access to that other students couldn't. So that's the power of self-explanation. So I was thinking about this and I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm starting to see where self-explanation is useful and where it's not. Perhaps teacher explanation is really useful if you're trying to help students to connect the new concept to something that the teacher has previously explicitly outlined. So it's like we've been doing a whole chapter on, or we've just been learning about the bossy E. Okay, here's another rule. This is another rule that's connected in XYZ way. And I'm the teacher. Students aren't meant to understand that, so I'm just going to explicitly explain it. Where I was thinking, and this is I'm just absolutely spitballing here. Like I said, this is off the cuff, so I'm really keen to hear your responses, guys, and for you to put me back in my box, ideally. Potentially, self-explanation has a lot of additional power. I think it could be used in that first context where it's connecting new instructed to old instructed content. But I think it also holds particular promise for getting students to make connections to their unique prior knowledge. Connections that other students potentially couldn't make, and connections that the teacher couldn't anticipate because they don't have a map of all the prior knowledge that students have. So relating to your personal experience, relating it to something they might have seen at a different school, relating to something from a different year, so the teacher might not be 100% sure what was covered, or it could also be connecting to something that was in a previous unit where the teacher's not 100% sure that it's actually stuck in students' long-term memories. So they want to see if that connection's made before they kind of step in. So yeah, I felt like that was a little bit of an insight that maybe came out. And I was just keen to test that against you guys. What do you think?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. Do you want to dive in first, Zach?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember. I think it was on ERRR. Alexander Renkel was on your podcast, wasn't it? Yeah, I think that was like the first time that I had heard. I had heard like the debate amongst cognitive scientists around self-explanation, where I think you mentioned that in your correspondences with John Sweller over the book, that he had said basically self-explanation is going to be redundant if you already know the information, and it's going to overwhelm if you don't know the information. The window is either extremely narrow or it's non-existent, right? And I think Wrinkle kind of gave a chuckle because he thought that was he said respectfully I think that's nonsense. That's all I want to say in that part because I'm really curious what you have to say, Craig. But yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to reference the Renkel podcast as well. Well, two podcasts. All I don't like giving you credit here, but the podcast with Sarah was fantastic. I absolutely loved that. I've listened to that twice now. I've done it on 2 runs. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And your Renkel podcast, I quote that all the time. Just with in terms of what makes an effective self-explanation, that it's got to be kind of transferable, not kind of related to the specific example, and so on and so forth. So just a couple of things on this. So I'll tell you one common thing I see where teachers try to get kids self-explaining, but it's always a disaster, right? So it's always useful, I think, to have a non-example for these kind of things. And that is, a teacher does a worked example, does an I do. And at the end of the I do, the teacher says, okay, copy that worked example down into your books and annotate it. Make it make sense to you. Explain how you get from line 1 to line 2. And it never, ever, ever works because it's the first time kids have ever seen anything like this. So they're just trying to get to grips with the example itself. So what they end up doing is just passively copying down exactly what's on the board, and that's it, right? So when it works a bit better, and we've probably talked about this as well. I'm getting old these days. I just repeat the same things again and again. Is shifting the copying down of the worked example to the end of the lesson. So I'm a big fan now. The teacher does the I do. We don't copy it down at all. We just dive straight into the we do, get the whiteboards out, and so on and so forth. But then at the end of the lesson, if you now return to that first example that we did, you can say, okay, copy it down into your books. And now see if you can make those explanations. How do you get from line 1 to line 2? Where might somebody go wrong with this? How does this link back to some topics we've done in the past? So if kids are going to have any chance at all of getting an effective self-explanation, they've got to have experienced a decent amount of that concept. Whereas I think, and even again, if you look at the math by example and algebra by example stuff that Michael Pershin's a huge fan of, that's all about self-explaining at the initial stage where you're kind of learning a model. And I'm not sold that that's the time to do it. I think the time to do it is later on, almost kind of as a kind of final check for understanding. Now, how deep do we understand this? Can we self-explain? So that was the first point I wanted to make. If we're going to self-explain, let's shift when we're going to do it to later on when it's typically done. And the second thing is, just from my own experience, when I found kids really get into self-explaining is when they're surprised by something. I think a surprise is almost a precondition of a successful self-explanation. And what I mean by that is, so let's imagine I teach you, whatever, factorizing quadratics or whatever it is, and you're following absolutely everything. I think it's quite hard then for you to kind of explain it because you kind of know it yourself, it kind of works and so on and so forth. But if you're surprised by something that happens, maybe you expected something and it doesn't quite turn out that way, then I think, oh, wow. And as soon as you're surprised by something, it's human kind of instinct to try and explain it. Let me try and reconcile what's actually happened with what I thought was going to happen. So I always find surprises, counterintuitive results, they tend to lend themselves better to self-explanations than just kind of procedures where it all pans out as you'd expect it to. So there's my kind of two reflections, Matt. I don't know if they're any use at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think the main thing I picked up from that is seeing self-explanations as an opportunity to check for understanding is powerful. And that relates to what I was saying in terms of they're good when the teacher's trying to provide students with an opportunity to connect the new knowledge to something that they're not sure the students have in long-term memory, but that may have been covered previously. So by saying, all right, what does this, explain to yourself, what does this relate to? Like which principle, which practice, whatever it might be that we've covered in the past, the teacher's actually essentially checking if students have been able to make that connection, if the prior knowledge is in their long-term memory. So I think that's a really powerful idea. You look like you wanted to say something to that.
No, just nodding. I think you're right. I think that's a good way of framing it, mate. I like that.
And then the final thing I was thinking is that this might actually be, tell me if I'm wrong, and this is why I was kind of prompted to go off script a little bit and explore this one today. This could be related to like a seventh principle for guidance, fading or gradual release of responsibility, which would be something like go from teacher explanations to self-explanations. I think it fits really, really well within that framework, and it is moving from like more teacher scaffolded to student led. So that was another thing to throw out there.
Ollie's now a co-author of your book there, Zach. He's 10% royalty for that one.
100%. That was the goal.
Oh, that's excellent. And it's interesting because y'all teach math too, and I find that a lot of the self-explanation stuff really applies to you. You read this text and you needed to kind of make sense of the text, and you explain the text, or instead of rereading the text, you explain what it says. But when you get into the procedures, you're more sort of saying the procedure. Sorry about that. You're more just sort of repeating the procedure, maybe. You're doing a lot of mental work that could be done on paper. I don't know. I encourage my teachers to use self-explanation, but there was that Barberry and all meta-analysis coming out about math showing that it wasn't particularly effective, even maybe a negative effect on mathematics, and I didn't even know what to make of it. So
I haven't heard about that study. I'm Googling it right now.
That's great. That's fantastic. Right. Should I do my final one? Is that all right? Is that all right with everyone?
Please, Craig.
Right, so first things first, it is a miracle that we've gone 90 minutes without either of you flipping Daniel Willingham's name into this. I don't know how that's happened, having both interviewed him, and obviously I haven't, so congratulations both of you on that. But I'm going to take your
No,
Dan
but
Willingham.
we have got to set a sideline chat with him in WhatsApp, and Zach and I have both been chatting to him during the discussion, so we didn't feel like it was necessary to mention him, Craig.
Yeah, I can imagine. That wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me. So anyway, I'm going to take your Dan Willingham and I'm going to raise you my new best mate in the world of cognitive psychology, Nick Soderstrom. So I interviewed him yesterday and I've just released the episode this morning, and it's one of my favourites I've ever done. Right. So if listeners aren't aware, Nick Soderstrom essentially is the Bjork's right-hand man. So he's done his PhD with Bob and Elizabeth Bjork. He's the co-author of one of my all-time favourite research papers, Learning versus Performance, an integrative review. He's done all the work on desirable difficulties. So I've been wanting to get him on for ages. But do you remember, Al, when we had Tom Sherrington and Emma Turner, I was sharing that pre-testing paper with you guys. So he wrote the pre-testing paper that I didn't really understand. So I thought I need to get him on. So anyway, chatted to him for 2 hours. And it's, as I said, it's one of my favourites. It's live now. And we go through everything. We go through learning versus performance, but we also go through testing, spacing, interleaving, and pre-testing, and I get him to explain what are the kind of explanatory mechanisms, how can teachers harness it, and so on. So there are two things I wanted to do. So one is just clear up something about pre-testing that I kind of muffled and got wrong last time. And then I want to return to one of Zach's, that number 3, this massed versus distributed practice. Okay, so it's a little 2 for 1, but I hope you'll forgive me on this. So first, pre-testing. So I fully understand what pre-testing is now, but I cannot believe this is effective. I cannot believe it's effective. So I ran Nick through a few scenarios, and he says, yeah, you're right. This is the thing. Okay, so what pre-testing isn't, I'll tell you 2 things it isn't. So it's not testing for prerequisite knowledge. So it's not, I'm about to teach adding fractions, so let's just give you a little test to see if you can do lowest common multiples, simplify fractions. So it's not that. It's also not a very common thing where you do a bit of a diagnostic before teaching a unit. So, your kids have been taught something about ratio in the past. So let's ask them a ton of questions on ratio, essentially to see where they're at in terms of a starting point where we start the new unit. So it's not that either. So it's literally give them a test on something they've never met before. They've no hope in hell of being able to answer it. And then because of two kind of mechanisms that I'll go into in a moment, when the kids are taught that new concept, they seem to understand this and retain it much better than if they weren't given the pretest. And the 2 mechanisms are, firstly, and this is the one that makes a bit of sense to me, kids essentially pay more attention to the new material because they've been made aware that they didn't understand it before. So they remember, I was clueless in the pretest. Oh, wow, that's that thing I didn't understand. Let me listen to it. And also, and this is why Nick speculates that the pretest effect is going to be more powerful in older students, and that's because he found that in the study, the students then kind of did more work outside of class on the stuff that had come up in the pretest than the students who weren't given the pretest initially. So it seems to kind of almost motivate the kids or stimulate them in a little way. So this is the kind of big exciting thing that he's working on now. There's replication studies going on. He wants to do it in different age groups, different kind of subject domains, and so on and so forth. So I've made a little point that I'm going to start doing a few little experiments on this. I think I'm a bit concerned with the kind of, in the same way I'm concerned about productive failure, that I think you need to have a certain type of student's going to get the most out of this. Like if you're a kid who has failed for years and years and years in maths, and then you're given this test that you fail on again, I think there's a danger you just switch off for the whole unit. Whereas if you're a motivated student and you realise that a bit of failure is just a short-term thing and so on and so forth, maybe you get a bit more out of it. And of course, how you frame this to the kids is going to be important as well. But just wanted to kind of double back on pre-testing, and if listeners want to know more about that, I chat to Nick for ages on it in the podcast. So that was point 1. But now I want to return to Zach's, right? So I'm with you, Zach, on this, right? So it makes perfect sense to me that before you start mixing things up, you want to do some massed practice. So before you start spacing up, in particular, before you start interleaving, you want to give some mass practice. So if I'm teaching my kids, and let's stick with adding fractions, I'm boring like that. So if I've taught my kids how to add fractions, I want to give them some practice of adding fractions before I then start mixing it up with adding decimals, multiplying fractions, and so on and so forth. That makes perfect sense to me. But I've now spoken to two people whose opinion I pretty much respect. So Robert Bjork and Nick Soderstrom, I've presented both of those people with the same scenario, and they've said, no, you want to mix as soon as possible. You want to introduce that desirable difficulty as soon as possible. So I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Like, it makes perfect sense to me that surely you need a certain level of kind of competence to make the difficulty of interleaving desirable. The only thing I could get Nick to kind of meet me halfway on is he could see it from a confidence perspective, that kids would just go into that mixed practice, distributed practice, feeling a bit more confident if they've had a bit of fluency practice, like blocked practice beforehand. But he said in terms of every study he's ever seen, there's no advantage to doing mass practice. Get it mixed up as soon as possible. But again, I don't buy it, but then I can't just say that, right? Because I'm picking out a load of other research findings that other people think are a load of nonsense. So I can't just suddenly say, because I don't agree with this, it's a load of rubbish. So I just wanted to throw it kind of, well, firstly to you, Zach, as well. My assumption would be you are kind of like me, right? You're saying, let's do some mass practice first before we mix it up. But how do you kind of reconcile it?
Yeah, and it's evidence is really important to me, right? So when I hear these papers, I go, you take everything with a bit of skepticism, you try to dig into them, and you try not to let sort of zealotry, ideology kind of like lead all of your thoughts, right? And because I really think helping students by breaking down the material is really important, and explicit instruction, explicit teachings like the methodology to do that. Let's start with the mass practice, bit. I working with students in a very small individual lesson, a very tight sort of single isolated event in which you told everybody, right, we're going to be mixing in problems that you don't know with some that you do know, or some that are older, right? Some that you just were exposed to, and give it a stab, right? I can imagine motivating students through that episode with a lot of effort, or maybe just by framing it correctly, And I think a lot of times you go into these research studies. I conducted a research study like this for my PhD, right? You go into these things kind of excited to give it a go and try to. You want to be part of something, right? Imagine you're a student, and this is going to be reported on. I want to take advantage of this opportunity. I wonder sometimes past that, and this I'm trying to meet these ideas, the research halfway. I wonder if past that, when we're talking about kids who have a lot of apathy towards learning, who have failed time and time and time again at school, who are years behind, and if we create opportunities in school where we're constantly making the material too hard and out of reach for these students, we're inducing anxiety in some ways, not improving it by this productive struggle, by this by this, hey, you barely have it. You barely, you barely have secured this skill. And now I want to space it out for you. Where when I've been teaching with these DI programs lately, it's amazing how much more successful they are. We're talking about 80-90% of their responses are correct, as opposed to 40-50%. The students are telling me, like, goodness gracious, this is so easy. And are we doing the dumb math, right? They'll say, are we in the dumb class, right? And you reframe it. You say, no, you guys are in the smart class, right? You didn't know this, but this is the advanced math group. You didn't understand, right? But they all of a sudden realize, and they've told me, It's the biggest compliment when you're intervening. Why can't you teach me the math? And I think it is confidence, and and I think with children over a long period of time, you really want to keep them feeling successful as a long-term motivator. I mean, that's my take on it.
What do you think, Al?
Yeah, sticking with the mixed one. I'm curious. So you said you gave two scenarios to Soderstrom and Bjork, and they said no, you want to interleave as early as possible. What were the scenarios?
Oh, just no, it was the kind of same scenario but based around the same topic. So I'd just say add infractions. Here are kind of two options I could go. One is I could give them 10, 15 minutes of fluency practice, then mix it up. The other is following the kind of worked example, and one kind of we do. Let's stop mixing things up straight away. And they're like, no, do the mixing. Got to do the mixing.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think so to think about the which one to go with. I think it's really helpful to talk about the mechanism by which interleaving is effective. And so for those who aren't familiar with it, any listeners, the mechanism of interleaving, the reason why interleaving is helpful for learning is that it increases a thing called discriminative contrast. And discriminative contrast is basically just noticing differences or comparing and contrasting between the two things, the two concepts or two or more that students are likely to get confused between. Now, it's not really that beneficial to do interleaving of concepts that students aren't going to get mixed up between, right? Because there's no discriminative contrast, or the discriminative contrast is inherently large enough that they're not going to get confused anyway. The time that it's valuable to do it is when you're doing two things that are similar, and so by switching between them, students go, oh, I see that difference that Sir was pointing out now, right? So I guess that's the first thing. And also something people often confuse is the idea of space practice with interleaving. So space practice, the benefit of space practice, and space practice can happen without interleaving. The benefit of space practice is that you are addressing the forgetting curve, and you are providing people with multiple exposures to content or multiple retrieval opportunities of content over time, and each time they do it, the forgetting curve flattens. Now that can be done, when I say that could be done without interleaving, that's because I could be learning just like one foreign word, and I could do space practice of that one foreign word in my own time. I'm spacing it. I'm not interleaving with anything. The reason why they often get confused, I think, is because in the classroom environment, if you want to space practice, you naturally end up mixing up multiple topics across a specific lesson because you have a designated amount of time with the students and you need to cover all these concepts because multiple ones are coming back through the spacing protocol. So when we're talking about these things, it's really important that we don't mix up or conflate space practice and interleaving. So that's I guess a first really important point that I think people need to be aware of. As for the when interleaving comes in thing, I agree. I think it's about finding a balance point, and thinking about that student success. That being said, and that trade-off. That being said, if we are truly using interleaving to help students distinguish between similar concepts, I actually think that students are more likely to have success if we introduce the interleaving earlier, or if we compare and contrast those examples more explicitly. And so I think that probably in many cases, if the content is well matched to interleaving, will lead to high success. It's been a bit of a roundabout response and a bit of a rant there, Craig, but I'm not sure if that adds anything.
Yeah, so just a couple of things on that. It's interesting, all right. So, like, the discriminative contrast is definitely a key mechanism in interleaving. But if you read a lot of the interleaving research papers, that's any kind of mixed practice is defined as interleaving. So a lot of Doug Rower's work is just on kind of you give kids an assignment, and you either give them, say there's 4 topics on the assignment that are completely disconnected to each other. You either give them 4 assignments which are all topic themed, or you give them 4 interleaved assignments. And by that, he's just meaning kind of mixing up the practice. So I think even in the world of research, that word gets kind of taken to mean lots of different things. And like the discriminative contrast is one of the explanatory mechanisms of interleaving, but also just the fact that kids switch constantly and have to reload kind of memories is another of the kind of explanatory mechanisms of it. But I agree with you, and I think I got Nick to this point as well, that the most effective interleaving is when you have that discriminative contrast kind of lever turned right up. So just two final things on this, and I'll give either of you a chance to come back on this. So I pitched in my idea of my SSDD problems, where, if listeners aren't familiar, you have 4 problems who all have a common surface feature, but whose deep structures are different. And for me, that's the most effective type of interleaving you can do, because that's where you really have the discriminative contrast at the forefront, because kids have got to say, why is this problem that has a right-angled triangle a Pythagorean theorem question, whereas this problem with a right-angled triangle requires me to do half base multiplied by height, or whatever it is. Whereas if they didn't have that common feature of that right-angled triangle, if the contexts were completely different and so on, kids wouldn't have to think what's the same, what's different, and so on and so forth. So, but then here's the final thing, and you've kind of teed me up for this all. I'll tell you something, he was having none of this, right? So, the type of problem, let's stick with Pythagoras, right? I think it's quite valuable to show students a load of Pythagoras questions with a load of different contexts. But I'm not talking the rubbish ones here where you've got like a ladder leaning up against the wall and you don't even need to bother with the context. You just see, oh, there's a right angle triangle, I'll just work out the height or whatever. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about ones where you've got a pair of coordinates and you've got to work out the distance between them. Or you've got a circle and you've got a bit of information, you've got to work out the length of the radius. All these problems that have got Pythagoras at the heart of it, but it's not immediately obvious. I think there's value in students studying problems whose surface features are different, but whose deep structures are the same, but then the teacher kind of guiding them to the point of saying, well, how did we know that both of these problems are Pythagoras, or all 4 of these problems are Pythagoras? What's the similarities between these? Because the problem with interleaving is you're always focusing on differences. And differences are super important in maths. Why is this question different to this? But if students aren't given an opportunity to think about similarities, why is this question from the same area of mathematics as this question? That feels a bit of a missed opportunity. We start to miss connections and so on and so forth. But he was having none of this. He says, no. That's the only thing I could get him to say was, as long as the kids didn't know in advance that they were all Pythagoras, he could maybe see a bit of value. But he was all about the switching. Whereas, again, I just think there's value in thinking about similarity as much as there's value in thinking about difference. But, again, I don't know.
What's really interesting.
Go ahead.
So, because I think you are kind of switching in that context, right? You're switching you're switching this question context. Exactly. You're switching the surface. So, I mean, I guess in that example, if you're providing them multiple examples in the same lesson, maybe you would get less benefit, because students are like, oh, okay, I get what Sir's doing here. He's helping us see lots of different Pythagoras questions. So they actually not as independently evaluating what type of question is this. So I can see that. Actually, so I mean, maybe that's what Nick was getting to.
Yeah,
so I think over an extended period of time, exposing students to all these different examples is what's required for them to generalize the use of Pythagoras more broadly. But there is a danger we fall into if we incorporate them all into the same lesson or a short period of instruction, because then students are going to recognize the instructional pattern, make inferences from that, and not go through the same thought process. So
but you
maybe
still want them close together, though, right? Because you want them to be able to compare. You don't just... They're not going to make that. If you just do like one Pythagorean context problem on Monday, and then another 2 weeks later, and another 5 weeks later, they're not going to draw the connections between them. So it still feels valuable to me to have them, close to each other. But as I say, yeah. Sorry, sorry, mate. Go for it. Go on.
2 brief things. One, maybe they will generalize across those examples, because I mean, the way that we would potentially learn in a natural environment is we might see one plant that's edible, and then a week later we might see a similar like a plant that's like looks a bit similar, but it's like a slightly different variation, and we do manage to kind of make those connections across time. So that's like, I'm not sure they won't, it might be less likely. But another thing we could do if we did want to space it out over time is we could space those questions out over like Monday, Tuesday, or different weeks. And then once students have identified that, oh, this one's Pythagoras, you could bring the original one back and say,
that's good.
oh, yes, that well done. Remember this one we did last week. Now think about the similarities and differences. Then you get the benefit of the discriminative contrast, and you lose the cost of them identifying the pattern and
that's better.
diagnosing
I
based
like
on
that.
that.
That's good, Al. That's good. Sorry, Zach, was there anything you wanted to add, mate, on that?
Yeah, like what did he mean? How immediate is immediate, right? When it comes to like, when you go to distributed practice or you go to interleaving, I mean, someone has to. I remember Robert Bjork in a presentation, talking about cognitive load theory, and he said like, well, yeah, like you want them to have something to retrieve, right? They have to have something to retrieve, otherwise it's not a desirable difficulty any longer. In the school day, you already have spacing built in, right? You have an hour for math or an hour for reading. There's immediate spacing every single day for for every student, just built into the school day. And then we have these do nows, these cumulative reviews where we're putting in material, mixing in material. I mean, how that feels pretty immediate to me. I don't know how more immediate that could be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree, and I think probably Nick would agree with this as well. I think his kind of key point was not enough and I agree with this, by the way, not enough teachers interleave, full stop. So if he's emphasising how important interleaving is, I think most teachers are going to block and practice initially anyway. But if you've got in your mind, all right, I need to get onto the interleaving fairly quickly, perhaps then, you're going to get that more effective practice. I think that's probably the angle he's coming from there. Yeah, that's good. Ollie, hand up in the area. This is a new one, new signal.
Well, I just want trying to be clear there, Craig. You talked about a second mechanism. Okay. You talked about another mechanism, which is potentially of the benefits of interleaving, which is potentially this kind of reloading of ideas. So that's an interesting one. Did Nick talk about that?
No, I've just come across it in the in the reading of it. I think there's three. There's discriminative contrast, there's this reloading, and there's attention attenuation, which is kind of very close to the discriminative contrast, kind of noticing. Yeah, basically, you can't coast through on autopilot when you're constantly having to switch. Whereas, if everything's Pythagoras, all right, I don't need to even read this question. It's just the same thing. Yeah, so okay. I think they're the kind of big three anyway.
Cool. Yeah, I'll send a follow-up email because I want to read more about that. But I'll also say, like, in terms of when to move on, there's just an interesting analogy of when to move on that I think I've been getting a bit of a sense of since like trying to learn poetry recently, right? So what I've found with poetry, like, well, I'll learn in lines of two together because often the rhyming scheme means that's easier to recall. And a question is like when you should move on to learn the next couple of lines, right? It's kind of like I think the analogy is there because it's like a new quote unquote concept. And I found that it's a bit redundant to kind of practice two lines until I can like perfectly reel them off, right? Because it's over rehearsing at the early stage of learning. What I'm much better off doing is, and this harks back to what Zach was saying about they have to have something to be able to retrieve, review the two lines till I get it right, like maybe once, then move on to the next two lines, do them till I do once, and then try to do all four lines together. Do that till I can do it once, add another two lines, maybe do lines 3, 4, 5, and 6 together. So I get a lot more benefit and I can learn a lot quicker if I focus less on perfection of each two-line segment at a time and think more about getting it to like simply an improved memory point that I can then build upon later. So I think that's potentially an analogy here. It's like, and maybe if students know that you're not meant to necessarily get it 100% or like be fully secure. I know that's not the case. All we're trying to do is be closer to that 100% memory point because we're going to build on it again. I just think that's a helpful analogy that kind of helps me to understand that point about like move on quickly, but also understand that might be challenging for some students.
It's good that and I think that was Nick's point. It was, let's make sure we get to the interleaving perhaps sooner than it's most people's instinct, because you don't have to have achieved mastery to interleave. You just need something to base it on. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's good. I'll tell you what, this would be a good way to kind of wrap up the main pod here, Al. I'm going to set you a little challenge here, because if you remember in our bonus pod, Ollie, you've got something else to say. Go on.
Yeah, we
go on.
didn't talk about pre-testing. We just spoke about interleaving.
Oh,
right?
yeah, I didn't know
There were
whether you
two
wanted
parts
to.
of your
Yeah.
question.
Okay,
Just
sorry.
one quick
Yeah,
thing.
go on.
One
Yeah.
thing. First of all, thanks for that summary. That was really interesting. I'm really looking forward to that podcast with Nick. I can't wait, and I've got a lot of respect for him as well. But I haven't ever heard him on a podcast, so I'm super keen. One of the things you said there was like maybe you need a certain type of students to really benefit from this, which is maybe potentially the more motivated ones who are willing to do outside of class thing. And you said you felt uncomfortable about that kind of productive failure idea. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in one of our discussions before, but in my first year of teaching, I was teaching in a super low SES school, and I was teaching like basically bottom set maths, and it was actually like a vocational program. They weren't doing the standard certificate. They were doing this one that's focused more on practical things. And it was really hard to get them to listen to me explaining maths to them, right? It was like a large class of all students. There was no end of year test. It was basically no stakes in terms of their achievement and so on and so forth. And I found that pretty much the only way I could get them to listen was to put up the question that I wanted to teach them how to do on the board and be like, all right, here's what we're looking at today. Have a go, right? And they'd be like, oh yeah, we've seen triangles before, sir. I'd be like, okay, that's great, you've seen triangles before. Have a go. And they'd try to do it, and they'd be like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I'd be like, oh, okay, oh, do you want me to explain it? And they'd be like, oh yeah, please, sir. I'd be like, oh, okay, sure. And then I'd explain it, and they'd actually listen to me, right? That was the only thing I could. If I just launched into, today we're learning about this, finding the area of a triangle. This is really interesting because blah, blah, blah. They'd just be like, switch off. So I think there's some sort of, that is a in a sense, some sort of pre-testing effect, I would say, that's in line with some of what you were talking about there with Nick. And I found it was a motivational factor for attention with lower achieving students as well.
It's interesting that. So again, I made the point to Nick that I thought it would work better with kind of more motivated students. He said he believed the opposite. So his argument was slightly different to yours. He said if you're a lower attaining student, it's quite nice that the kind of a pre-test levels the playing field, because everybody fails it. No one has a bloody clue how to do it, right? So you're not bottom of the pack anymore. You're the same as everybody else, and that's can be quite empowering for kids. We're all in this together, we're all at the same level. So, yeah, again, maybe my intuition is just wrong on this. That perhaps it is, well, firstly, effective, which I didn't believe it was, and perhaps it's potentially more effective with lower achieving students. Yeah, interesting. All right, so here's what I want to do to wrap things up, right, Al? So get yourself woken up for this bit, right? So do you remember on the pod last time in our Patreon special for your Patreon listeners, we talked about our favourite podcast episodes, and you recommended one from Econ Talk on poetry. So as promised, I went ahead and listened to that, and I was blown away. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So I bought Isaac, my 4-year-old, a poetry book, best kind of kids' poems, and we read one each night. And he's loving it, right? And his memory's amazing. Like, kids' memories are just amazing. So he's learnt one. And it's the first, I mean, this is the kind of level we're at in our house. Okay, we're not, forget Keats and stuff like that. We're not talking Kipling here. We're talking, it's called Homework. And it starts like this. It says, Homework, I hate you, you stink. I wish I could wash you away down the sink. So that's how it starts. And he recites it. It's about 16 lines and so on and so forth. But Ollie, I heard you say it might have been with Sarah or another of your podcasts I was listening to, that because you've been learning poetry, you're out for dinner with friends and they got you to kind of recite some and so on and so forth. Would you mind just doing us a little bit now to kind of wrap up this episode? Just give us a couple of lines of verse.
I love that you're calling me out on this one. I can't remember mentioning that in the Sarah episode, so I'm glad I did. But yeah, I was out with, it was quite funny. So I was out with Josh Goodrich, Sam Sims, and Harry Fletcher Wood. And that day we had delivered a PD session for teachers on instructional coaching. And at the school, it was quite a fancy school, but they had this plaque commemorating a past student who had gone on to become like an outback drover, who's someone who kind of drives cattle through the outback, and then they were like, oh, what's a drover? And I started to kind of explain it, and somehow they can't even remember how the conversation got to here, but they were like, it got to the point I was like, oh yeah, I do know a poem about drovers. I think we'd been talking about poetry earlier. Anyway, this one's called Clancy of the Overflow, and it's by Banjo Patterson, who's one of the great Australian poets. Do you want me to do the whole thing? It takes about 4 minutes.
No, just give us a little
Okay.
teaser. Leave them wanting more. Al. That's the key
All
to
right,
this.
I'll give you a few lines. I had written him a letter, which I had, for want of better knowledge, sent to where I met him down the Lachlan years ago. He was shearing when I knew him, so I sent the letter to him, just on spec, addressed as follows: Clancy of the Overflow. And an answer came directed in a writing unexpected, and I think the same was written with a thumbnail dipped in tar. 'Twas his shearing mate who wrote it, so verbatim I will quote it. Clancy's gone to Queensland droving, and we don't know where he are. There you go, and it goes on.
Woo!
Beautiful,
Lovely
beautiful
that,
poem.
Al. It's a skill. It's a brilliant skill to have. That's amazing. All right, okay, so let's bring things to a close for the kind of full pod. We'll record a little bonus for the patrons. So, Zach, I want to hand over to you to kind of wrap things up. What should listeners check out of yours if they want a bit more, Zach?
Yeah, well, you can find Progressively Incorrect on all the podcasts. I think if you love this podcast, you'll like it. I try to kind of bring in a lot of the debates around inquiry learning and discovery learning. So check that out. Also, my website is called educationrickshaw.com. I was living in Sudan for 3 years teaching 4th grade and created that website and just kind of fell in love with rickshaws because they were everywhere. You can find me there and on Twitter.
Brilliant stuff. We'll link to all that in the show notes. That's amazing. Ollie, what are listeners going to check out of yours?
My weekly email, EdThreads, is a great place to get more ramblings from me if you do think that there's anything valuable that I have to say. So if you just jump onto ollielovell.com/subscribe, you should be able to find that, or in Craig's show notes. And the other thing is, I mentioned it today, the certificate in coaching leadership that StepLab runs. I'm launching this certificate next year in Australia. It's a year-long program specifically designed to support people who are leading instructional coaching in their school. And so if you want to come along to a couple of 4 days worth of in-person PD with me, plus year-long support, you can check that out. And it's also a certificate that's run in the UK by the StepLab team, like Josh. Josh is actually flying out to help me run it, along with some of the other team members, but they also run in the UK. So if you're in either of those kind of areas and you're looking to really upskill in your coaching, you might be interested in that as well.
That's brilliant. And final thing from me, I have 2 newsletters, Tips for Teachers, every Monday that comes out. But my ED newsletter that comes out every Tuesday. I did a controversial one. I mentioned this last time, all that we spoke. Green pen corrections don't work. It was all kicking off about that one. And then I've got 2 new ones. One that I've just released, and I'm releasing another on Tuesday, to kind of piggyback off Rob Coe's famous poor proxies for learning. I've got poor proxies for understanding and poor proxies for listening. And I've put a list of those based on the kind of loads of things that I see in the classroom. So you'll find links to all our newsletters, podcasts, and so on in the show notes. But all it remains for me to do for the main pod is to thank our fantastic guest, Zach, for a debut on the show. That you've outshone us there. That was absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for your time. That was absolutely brilliant. And as ever, Ollie, thank you. You've managed to get out of bed at the ungodly hour of 7 a.m. I don't know how you managed to do it, but we're all eternally grateful for that. And thank you for our lovely, loyal listeners. Take care.